Howdy, everybody. I recently took a trip to Zion National Park out in Utah. I flew into Vegas. It was about a 2.5-hour drive to Zion. The drive is actually really pretty. I got in that evening, maybe an hour before sunset, and drove down the Zion Mount Carmel Highway. The great thing about Zion is just driving through the canyon is so beautiful. There are many pull-in points to stop and get out and take pictures, which I did. At a certain point, I turned around and went back to Canyon Junction and parked right near there. I took a few pictures near the Canyon Junction Bridge and went down by the river as well. That was all I did that first evening. The next morning I was doing Angel's Landing, so I got to the visitor center for the first shuttle, which I believe was at 7 a.m. The shuttle stop to start Angel's Landing was the Grotto, so that's where I got off and started on the West Rim Trail to Scouts Lookout, and there are some really beautiful points just on this ascent to Scouts Lookout, but you'll be going up quite a few switchbacks to get there. I was actually a little nervous about the Angel's Landing hike because I have a little bit of a fear of heights, and I did not know exactly how scared I would be once I got up there, and I can't tell you why, but I was not scared at all for the entire Angel's Landing hike. For some reason, the stability of the chain and the fact that there were a few other people around made it way less scary than it could have been. So I was surprised that I was more excited than scared when doing this hike. I did meet a couple people on the bus who were also doing the hike at the same time, so we formed a little group and all went together. This is really such an epic hike. It's tough to find a better viewpoint of anything anywhere than Angel's Landing. It's such a unique experience. After I finished Angel's Landing, I went down to the bus stop at the Grotto and then decided to do the Emerald Pools Trail, which was accessible at the same point. So I started on the Kayenta Trail, which led to the Upper Emerald Pools Trail, which was very interesting, especially because of the large amounts of snowfall and the fact that it had been really cold very recently. When I was there, those were the first few days that the temperature was actually in the 60s and 70s that spring. After the Upper Emerald Pools Trail, I went to the Lower Emerald Pools Trail. I skipped the Middle Pools Trail because I heard the upper and lower were the best. Now, these were very crowded trails at this time. It was around 10 a.m. when I was doing these, and there were so many kids and so many people crowding these trails that it definitely took away from the experience, and I would have liked to go back again early in the morning or evening, but I ended up not doing that. After this, I went to the Narrows just to explore. I had not rented equipment yet at this point to actually hike into the Narrows, and I regret that because for the rest of the trip, every day the Narrows was closed due to fast-moving water because of the large amount of snow melt that was happening. But it was still nice to explore the area. There was a little waterfall coming down at a certain point, and I did end up going back here a couple days later, and the waterfall was way bigger. But once again, this was midday, so it was very, very busy there. After this, I explored Kolob Terrace Road a little bit. I wanted to spot the subway trail, which I would be attempting the next day. And then I just drove along the road, looking at different views and waiting for a sunset that evening. There are a lot of places to pull in, to stop and take pictures. A lot of places there aren't formal trails, but you can get out and just walk onto the rocks and climb up to certain points. I got a really nice view of the sun setting in the distance by doing this. The next morning, I was planning to hike the subway trail, which I had gotten a permit for. When I went to pick up my permit the day prior, the park ranger actually recommended that I not do the hike because of the fast-moving water and the high water level, but I wanted to at least give it a shot. So I got there nice and early before the sun had risen. I had rented some waterproof shoes and socks from Zion Outfitters the night before, so I had those on. The sun was rising at the perfect time, and I got some really nice photos of that. But the subway trail has a really steep descent right at the start, and this is not a maintained trail, so I would suggest having the All Trails app just to guide yourself through and to make sure you're going the right way if it's your first time. But you'll go down this really steep descent, and then I believe from then on it's relatively flat. But once I had gotten down to the river, I saw that the water would have been over my knees right away to walk through it. I played it safe this time around. I just stuck around the river, took a few pictures, and headed right back up. Now, this was a Saturday, and I knew it was going to be very busy at Zion, so I decided to drive over to Bryce Canyon, which was a couple hours away, and it was much less crowded than Zion. Now, this was mid-April, and there was still snow on the ground in Bryce, but it wasn't particularly cold there. It was maybe 50 degrees outside. I stopped at the first viewing location that I came to in Bryce, which was Sunrise Point, which gives you a great view of the vast canyon of hoodoos below with the mountains in the background. And it was really beautiful with snow still blanketing a lot of the landscape. There is a trail that starts right there at the Sunrise Point viewpoint, and I began hiking down this trail. It was such an interesting hike. I had never seen hoodoos like this before, and you're just surrounded by them. There are little holes in the rock that you walk through. There are spaces between rocks that you walk through. It's a really interesting hike. So I hiked down to Queen's Garden and spent a little bit of time there, and then kept going further until I got to the junction where you would continue on to Sunset Point, which was closed this day. So at this point, I turned around and went right back up to the viewpoint. I did take my time and enjoyed the hike, but this was pretty much all I did at Bryce. I spent maybe 3 hours in this area before driving back to Zion that afternoon. As I drove back into Zion that evening, I stopped at the Canyon Overlook Trail and Viewpoint, which is a short but interesting hike and offers a great view of the canyon. I initially planned to stop here during a sunrise or sunset, but I decided against that because when you're in Zion Canyon, you don't get the beautiful colors lighting up the sky like you would in the Grand Canyon or in Death Valley, where you can see the horizon in the distance. The horizon is blocked off by the canyon. So the most you're going to get is the sun lighting up the mountains, which I didn't think was worth waking up early or staying out late for. Kolob Terrace Road is a much better place to see these colors in the sky, but regardless, Canyon Overlook was a great stop. If you do Angel's Landing, you're inevitably going to compare the two. Angel's Landing is the most epic view in the park, so it wins in that area, but Canyon Overlook is a place where you could go and hang out for an hour. You're never going to hang out for an hour at Angel's Landing. It's usually very windy up there anyway. This was the final thing I did this day. On my way back to my hotel, I did see some mountain goats that caused a bit of a traffic jam on the side of the road. I got out and took some videos of them. I had seen one or two earlier in the trip, but this was the first time I saw an entire group of them. The next morning, I woke up early to catch the first shuttle bus to Weeping Rock. I had heard there was a waterfall that formed there due to the snowmelt, so I wanted to get there before the crowds arrived. And regardless, you want to get to the visitor center early if you want to guarantee a parking spot. I'd say by 8 a.m. is a safe bet. But the waterfall at Weeping Rock was actually amazing. The rocks were still weeping, but they were a bit overshadowed by this massive waterfall. For the first 5 or 10 minutes, no one else was there, and I got to take plenty of pictures and videos. I was basically right next to the waterfall, and the sun was rising at the time, so it was lighting up the canyon walls in the background. It was a really beautiful experience having this to myself for a few minutes. Another group did come up after me, and we ended up taking some pictures of each other, but I made my way back down soon after that. After this, I walked right across the street to the river and explored this area. It was actually a great place for getting pictures in the morning when no one else is around. There was this great sense of solitude, which is very rare to come by in Zion. After spending some time here, I walked down a short trail that went along the river up to Big Bend, which is the next shuttle stop after Weeping Rock, but it's really just right around the corner. So it was an easy walk over there. After this, I took the shuttle from Big Bend back to the visitor center, and a couple days prior, I had talked to a park ranger, and he recommended that when you're on Zion Mount Carmel Highway, anytime you see a carved out pull-in area, even if there's no trail at that location, you can get out and explore that area of the park. There are a lot of places with access to the river, and there are even hidden trails at certain points. So this is what I did midday and early afternoon. I parked at a certain area and started climbing up sections that weren't too steep. This way, I avoided the crowds, and it seemed like I had a little section of the park all to myself. On my way back to my car, a cyclist riding by stopped and asked me if I found the hidden trail that was right up the road. I said no, and she told me It's a great trail with this beautiful waterfall, so I obviously had to explore that. The trail started just before the start of a bridge, and it leads to an area with some carved out pools of water. This day there was only stagnant water sitting in the pools. I'm sure if there had been more rain recently, it might have looked different. But I continued walking down this area, which is kind of a trail, but really there was just nowhere else to turn, so you had to go this way. And eventually I get to this waterfall, but it's just a tiny trickle that's coming out of the wall. And this lady had described this amazing waterfall. It was comical how small it was. It was like, how small can this waterfall actually be and not get evaporated? So I laughed at that for a minute and then turned around and headed back out. Still, I think this was a worthwhile little trail. It was very peaceful. When I got back to the starting point of the trail, I actually went under the bridge. There was a tunnel there that led to the river on the other side, which was another beautiful spot. There are so many areas like this in Zion where you can just go down to the river and spend some time there. After I explored this area for a few minutes, I went back up to my car and headed back to the visitor center. The final thing I did this day, and the final thing I did in Zion, was to rent a bike and ride through Zion Canyon Scenic Drive. I wanted to experience the canyon without looking through the windows of the shuttle bus and getting your views blocked off by the roof. And I'm very glad I did this. From the visitor center, you go down the Peruse Trail, which is a paved trail for both hikers and bikers, but there's plenty of space to pass around hikers when you need to, as long as you let them know you're riding by. I rode all the way to the end of the canyon to the Temple of Senawava without making any stops at any of the other points. When I got to the end, I saw that the waterfall that I had seen a few days prior was now much bigger and more impressive. So I took some videos and pictures of that. I had not even planned to stop here. I just planned to go to the end and turn around. So it was a pleasant surprise seeing the waterfall like this. I was on one of the regular bikes, not one of the electric assisted bikes, but still the ride was not too difficult. There was maybe a slight incline all the way to the end of the road, but on the way back it made it that much easier. This was actually one of my favorite parts of the entire trip, so I highly recommend doing a bike ride through the canyon in either the morning or the evening when there are fewer people. And this capped off my trip to Zion. I hope you enjoyed the video and found some of this useful. If you did, stick around for the next one. Bye!